My name is Emily, and this is the story of how I lost my family and found myself. I was born and raised in a modest town in the Midwest, where the streets held the same memories as my childhood, and the air was thick with unspoken rules. My parents were the kind of people who believed in tradition with a fierceness that was both comforting and suffocating. They believed that family was everything, and that a daughter's duty was to uphold the family name by following a path carefully laid out long before she was born. Growing up, I was the obedient girl, the one who smiled and nodded, who did well in school, and who listened more than she spoke. But inside me, there was a storm brewing, questions about who I really was, and what kind of life I wanted to live. While my parents dreamed of me marrying young, having children soon after, and settling in our hometown, my heart raced for the unknown. I dreamed of cities alive with possibility, of careers filled with creativity, of freedom to make choices without fear of judgment. But dreams have a way of clashing with reality, especially when reality is a family's expectations. The tension started as subtle disapproval, the sighs when I mentioned college plans outside the state, the quick changes of subject when I talked about wanting to delay marriage. At family gatherings, I was the odd one, the daughter who wouldn't follow the script. My parents would whisper behind closed doors, and their eyes often looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and confusion. One afternoon, when I was barely 18, my mother sat me down in the kitchen. Her face was stern, but her eyes betrayed a deeper pain. "Emily," she said softly, "you have to understand, we only want what's best for you. But your choices, they frighten us." I remember the lump in my throat, the urge to scream that I was more than their fears, that I was my own person. But I swallowed my words and nodded, afraid of what rebellion would cost me. That fear proved justified. Over the next few years, as I pushed harder for independence, applying to art schools hundreds of miles away, refusing to date the suitors they chose, asserting my right to live on my own terms, the rift grew. Conversations turned to arguments, and arguments to cold silences. My parents' disappointment hardened into rejection. The final blow came unexpectedly during a family reunion when I was 21. Surrounded by relatives and old friends, my parents announced, loud enough for all to hear, that I was no longer welcome as their daughter. "Emily has chosen a path that separates her from this family," my father declared. "We cannot support choices that go against everything we believe." The room fell silent except for the sharp crack of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Faces I had once trusted looked away, some with pity, others with disapproval. I felt invisible, erased from the family I had known all my life. That day, I left not just a house or a town, I left a part of myself behind. But something else was born within me, a fierce determination to survive and to carve out my own place in the world. Leaving home wasn't just about distance, it was about breaking free from a life scripted for me. The weeks and months that followed were brutal. I took on every job I could find, waiting tables until midnight, cleaning offices at dawn, anything to pay rent and bills. Exhaustion became my constant companion, but so did the quiet hope that someday, all this hardship would lead me to a life I could call mine. Amid the relentless grind, I found moments of peace in the small things, the first time I cooked a meal alone, the way sunlight streamed through my apartment window, the smell of fresh paint in the tiny studio where I practiced drawing. These fragments of independence were precious, reminders that I was building something real. Still, loneliness gnawed at me. I missed my family, not the harsh words or the judgment, but the shared laughter, the comfort of belonging, the simple fact of being seen. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if they ever thought of me, if they missed the daughter they disowned. But the wounds of rejection ran deep, and I learned to guard my heart. I told myself that acceptance from them was no longer the prize, survival was. I began to understand that sometimes, love isn't enough to bridge the gap between who you are and who others want you to be. And so, I kept moving forward. After months of scraping together every cent, I managed to buy a small house in a quiet neighborhood. It was modest, nothing like the grand homes I'd once envied, but it was mine, a sanctuary where I could finally breathe. Each nail hammered, each wall painted was a victory, a declaration that I belonged here, on my own terms. This house was more than a building, it was proof that I could stand alone, that my choices were valid. It was the first tangible sign that I had survived the storm. Yet, even with this hard-won independence, a quiet ache remained. The question of belonging, of whether family was something you earned or simply born into, haunted me. Little did I know, that question was about to be answered in the most painful way imaginable. Even though I had built a home for myself, the walls I put up around my heart were not so easy to construct. Every time I crossed the threshold of that little house, I felt the weight of absence, of the family dinners I was no longer invited to, the birthdays celebrated without me, the quiet spaces where my laughter once belonged, now filled with silence. I remember the nights when the loneliness was so overwhelming it felt like a physical ache. I would sit by the window, watching neighbors gather in their yards, sharing stories and smiles that I had once thought would be mine. In those moments, I wrestled with the bitter truth: I was alone by choice, but the choice had come at a price I had never fully understood. Sometimes I questioned myself, was it worth it? Had I been foolish to challenge the expectations of those I loved? The voice of doubt whispered that I should have stayed quiet, kept my dreams small, conformed to keep the peace. But then, a stronger voice within reminded me of who I was, of the fire that had driven me to seek more than a prescribed life. That inner flame was what carried me through the darkest days. When the rent was overdue, and the exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole, I clung to the idea that independence was not just a word but a way of being, an act of courage to live authentically, no matter the cost. My house became my fortress. I painted the walls with colors that spoke of hope, soft blues and warm yellows, colors that felt like sunlight after a storm. I filled the rooms with art I created, sketches that captured my dreams, memories, and moments of resilience. Each brushstroke was a rebellion against the past, a claim on the future. Yet, as the months turned into years, a quiet yearning persisted. It was not just the need for family, but for acknowledgement, for my existence to be seen and respected by those who once called me daughter. I would receive occasional texts from distant relatives, vague invitations that felt more like obligations than genuine connection. And I watched from afar as my younger brother, the golden child, celebrated milestones that my parents proudly shared on social media. The ache of exclusion was sharp, a reminder that I was living a life parallel to theirs, separate and unseen. Despite all this, I made peace with my decision. I surrounded myself with friends who became my chosen family, people who understood my struggles and celebrated my victories. I learned to love myself fiercely, to protect my heart from wounds that others refused to heal. But no matter how far I ran, or how strong I became, the past was never truly behind me. One afternoon, as I sat in my kitchen sipping coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was my mother. The words were simple but sent a chill through my veins: "We need to talk." My heart raced. Was this a sign of reconciliation? Or the beginning of another battle? I didn't know yet. But what I did know was that the story I had lived so far, the story of a daughter lost and found, was about to take a turn I could never have imagined. Because sometimes, when you think you've escaped the past comes knocking on your door. The message from my mother haunted me for days before she actually showed up. When she finally appeared on my doorstep, I was unprepared, not just for her presence, but for what she brought with her. She wasn't alone. Behind her followed a flurry of activity: my younger brother, the favored son, smiling as if he owned the world, along with several relatives, friends, and even event planners. In her hands, my mother carried what looked like a formal invitation, carefully printed and stamped with the family crest I had once felt proud to be associated with. "We're here to talk about the wedding," she said, her voice as calm and determined as a winter's wind. "Your brother's wedding. We want to hold it here. Here." My heart stumbled as I blinked, searching her face for some hint of misunderstanding. "At my house?" I asked, voice barely steady. "Yes," she said, eyes unwavering. "Your house is the perfect place. It's beautiful, spacious, and convenient. We're saving thousands by not renting a hall." Her words landed like a slap. The house I had built with sweat and sacrifice, my sanctuary from the rejection, was suddenly claimed as the backdrop for an event I had no part in. I swallowed hard, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "You can't just decide that without asking me," I said firmly. My mother's smile didn't waver. This is a family matter, Emily. And this house has always belonged to the family. I closed the door softly but decisively. The act felt like closing a chapter one wasn't ready to face, yet the sound of laughter and chatter outside the walls reminded me that this wasn't going away. Days passed as I wrestled with the reality that my family expected me to surrender my home, my hard-won independence, to their whims. They began moving furniture in, sending out invitations, and arranging catering, all without so much as a phone call to me. Each update felt like another cut to the heart. The idea of my home being transformed into a party venue for the family that had turned its back on me was unbearable. At night, I lay awake, imagining the sounds of celebration echoing through my rooms, the clinking of glasses, the laughter of guests, the vows of a new union, all while I was left outside, invisible and unheard. The worst part wasn't the loss of control over my physical space, it was the erasure of my identity. Invitations were sent out without my name. My presence wasn't requested, nor was my opinion considered. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their eyes. This was no longer about a wedding, it was about power and recognition. About who belonged and who didn't. I tried to reach out, to negotiate, to appeal to reason, but every attempt was met with cold dismissal. One evening, I called my mother. "Mom," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "this is my house. I bought it with my own money, after everything we went through. I need you to respect that." Her reply was sharp. "You think money gives you rights? This is our family home. You don't get to decide." That conversation shattered something inside me. I realized then that this wasn't just about property. It was a battle for dignity and acknowledgement. My brother, the golden child, remained silent, but his presence was a constant reminder of the gulf between us. He never once asked how I felt or whether I agreed. He simply assumed his place in the family narrative, one that excluded me. The tension grew unbearable. Neighbors started to notice the unusual activity at my home. Trucks arrived carrying tables, chairs, and decorations. Invitations had gone out to dozens of people I barely knew, and people who once called me family, now strangers in my own house. I felt my sanctuary slipping through my fingers, and with it, the fragile sense of security I had built. But beneath the fear and anger, something stronger was rising, a resolve that this time, I would not back down. Because this was more than a house. This was my life. My identity. And I was going to fight for it. The days that followed were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. My once peaceful refuge had turned into a battleground. I could hear the hum of preparations through the walls, the shuffling of feet, the murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses and plates that weren't mine to touch. Every sound felt like a violation. One afternoon, I stood by the window, watching as workers unloaded crates and set up rows of folding chairs across my backyard. I saw familiar faces among the invited guests, people who once smiled at me as family, now chatting excitedly, oblivious to the storm raging just inside the door. I tried to keep myself together, but the weight of betrayal pressed down until my chest ached. How could they treat me like this? How could they ignore me so completely, pretend I didn't exist? I thought about the countless nights I had poured my heart into making this house a home, about the sacrifices I had made to be free. And now, it was being stolen from me, not by force, but by family. The worst moment came when my mother called me to tell me the final plans had been set. "We're expecting over 100 guests," she said with forced cheer. "Everything's going smoothly. You should come by for a toast." I couldn't believe the audacity. After all they'd done, she wanted me to be part of a celebration where I was not welcome. I refused. I told her, "This is my home. You have no right to use it without my permission." Her voice rose, bitter and commanding. "Emily, you're being unreasonable. This is a family event. This house belongs to all of us." I clenched the phone, fighting tears and fury. Legally, it belongs to me. And emotionally, it belongs to the daughter you disowned. That conversation marked the beginning of an all-out war. When the day of the wedding arrived, my family arrived early, transforming my home into a venue that was as foreign as their rejection. Tables draped in white linens lined the backyard. Flowers and fairy lights decorated every corner. A DJ's equipment stood ready to fill the air with music and laughter. I stood at the edge of my property, watching as guests arrived, some casting curious glances my way, others ignoring me completely. I felt invisible. Erased. When I finally confronted my mother, she looked at me with icy resolve. "This is our home," she declared loudly, her voice carrying over the growing crowd. "You may have the deed, but this is the family's place." I looked around at the people gathered, their faces expectant, and I felt a surge of strength. This was my moment. "I am the owner of this house," I said clearly, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "You cannot use it without my consent. This is my home, not yours." The crowd murmured. My mother's face twisted with anger. "You think you can defy your family?" she spat. "After all we've done for you?" I shook my head. "After everything you've done to me?" "I'm not defying family, I'm defending myself." In that charged moment, I called the police. When the officers arrived, they listened to both sides, and the reality was clear. The legal deed was mine, the authority was mine. Reluctantly and amid whispers and glares, my family packed up their things and left, their pride bruised but their plans in ruins. As the last car drove away, I stood alone in my yard, a strange mix of exhaustion and triumph washing over me. I had fought for my home, and for my dignity, and won. But the victory was bittersweet. I knew that the ties with my family were severed beyond repair. That acceptance would never come on my terms. Yet, as I closed the door behind me, I felt something new. A fierce, unyielding sense of self. A knowledge that family isn't always about blood or shared history. Sometimes, family is the courage to stand alone and to protect what is yours. The days leading up to the wedding had already felt like a relentless storm, but nothing prepared me for the moment when the full weight of my family's betrayal slammed into me like a tidal wave. I woke early that morning to the sound of trucks rumbling down the street and footsteps echoing outside my bedroom window. Through the blinds, I saw them unloading more chairs, tables, and decorations, transforming my once quiet home into a festive arena where I was no longer the guest of honor, but an unwelcome spectator. My heart pounded as I got dressed, each step feeling heavier with the knowledge that this was the day I would have to fight, not just for a house, but for my very identity. I stepped outside, the morning sun casting long shadows across my yard. My mother was already there, surrounded by relatives and friends, her eyes sharp and resolute. Without hesitation, she greeted me with a cold smile. "Good morning, Emily," she said, voice dripping with false warmth. "We're almost ready. You're going to be part of something beautiful." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm not part of anything here," I replied. "This is my home. You're here without my permission." She waved a hand dismissively. "This is family, Emily. You'll understand when you see the ceremony." I shook my head. "I understand perfectly. You don't respect me or what I've built. You want to use me like a backdrop, nothing more." Her smile faltered for a split second, then hardened. "Your attitude is the problem," she said sharply. "You think this is about you, but it's about all of us. Your brother deserves this day." Her words hit me with brutal clarity. In their eyes, I was an obstacle, an inconvenient shadow cast over their perfect plans. Guests began to gather, chatting excitedly, their faces filled with anticipation. Some glanced at me warily, others turned away, uncomfortable or perhaps loyal to the side that had excluded me. I felt alone, but something deep inside refused to break. I took a breath, letting the quiet rage settle into determination. "This house is mine," I declared, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "Not by sentiment, not by tradition, but by law. You have no right to force your plans on me." My mother's eyes flashed with fury. "You think a piece of paper means everything?" she spat. family is more than a deed. You'll regret standing against us." A few guests murmured their agreement, emboldened by her words. The tension thickened like fog. The air seemed to hum with unsaid threats and old grievances resurfacing. Suddenly, my brother stepped forward, his face unreadable. "Emily," he said quietly, "this isn't personal. It's about the family's future. You're being selfish." His words stung more than any argument. How could the brother I grew up with, who I once thought loved me, call me selfish when I was fighting to protect what was rightfully mine? I felt the weight of every betrayal, every insult, every moment I was pushed away. But I refused to crumble. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not selfish for standing up for myself. I'm selfish for surviving where you only see what you want." My voice carried across the yard, reaching ears that had once ignored me. The crowd shifted, some uneasy, others rallying behind my family. My mother stepped closer, her voice low but cutting. "If you don't step aside, we'll make sure you have nowhere left to stand." Her words weren't just threats, they were promises. I looked around, realizing the battle had moved beyond words. It was time to stand my ground, whatever the cost. The threat in my mother's voice sent a shiver down my spine, but I stood my ground, refusing to let fear dictate my actions. This was my home, my life, and I wasn't about to let anyone trample over it, not even my own blood. The guests around us grew restless, whispers swirling through the crowd like a gathering storm. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with suspicion, caught between family loyalty and the undeniable injustice unfolding before them. Suddenly, one of my cousins stepped forward, a man I barely knew but who wore the same cold expression as my mother. "You're causing a scene, Emily," he said, voice low but menacing. "This isn't the place for your rebellion." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not the one causing a scene. I'm trying to protect my home from being stolen." At that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down. It was a message from my lawyer, reminding me that I had every legal right to evict anyone trespassing on my property without my permission. That message felt like a lifeline. I wasn't alone in this fight. Gathering my courage, I pulled out my phone and said firmly, "I'm calling the police. You have no right to be here against my will." My mother's face twisted in fury. "You think the law will save you from your own family?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Because family doesn't give anyone the right to violate another's home." I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, and I explained the situation: unauthorized use of private property, potential trespassing, and a family dispute. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived. Their presence was a relief and a reminder that my rights mattered. They listened carefully as I explained my side, showing them the deed to the house and explaining how my family had ignored my objections. My mother argued passionately, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "This house has been in our family for generations. She's trying to erase us." One officer exchanged a glance with the other and said quietly, "Ms. Emily, the property deed shows you as the sole owner. We can't allow an event on your property without your consent." The crowd murmured. The realization sank in: the law was on my side. My mother's shoulders sagged, her fury giving way to bitter defeat. "I never thought it would come to this," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Slowly, the family began to pack up their decorations and equipment. The laughter and music that had threatened to drown me faded into silence. As the last of the guests left, I stood alone in the quiet yard, surrounded by empty chairs and discarded ribbons, a battlefield where I had won, but at a cost. The officers left, offering words of support and encouragement. I locked the door behind me and sank into a chair, exhaustion crashing over me like a tidal wave. Tears I hadn't realized were held back spilled freely. The house was mine, but the family I once dreamed of reuniting with was gone. I had protected my home, but in doing so, I had sealed the final chapter of a family fractured beyond repair. Yet in that solitude, a new strength emerged. I was no longer the scared girl who left home years ago. I was a woman who fought for her place in the world. And no one, not even family, could take that away. The days following the confrontation felt strangely silent, like the calm after a violent storm. My home, once bustling with preparations and unwanted guests, returned to its quiet solitude. But inside me, the echoes of what had happened reverberated relentlessly. I moved through my days mechanically, caught between relief and an aching emptiness. The victory I had fought so hard to claim was real, but the cost was more than I had anticipated. Family ties, once a source of warmth and identity, had been severed with ruthless finality. My phone no longer buzzed with messages from relatives, the familiar faces at the grocery store no longer smiled my way. It was as if I had been erased, not just from my family's plans, but from their lives entirely. At night, when the world quieted, the weight of isolation pressed down hard. I wrestled with the painful question, what was left when the people who were supposed to love you turned away? Yet, amidst the shadows of loss, a light flickered, a realization that my survival depended on more than just family acceptance. It depended on protecting myself. I began to rebuild, not just my home, but my sense of worth and security. I surrounded myself with people who valued me for who I was, not who I was expected to be. Friends became my family, their presence a balm to the wounds left by blood ties broken. Therapy sessions helped me unpack the layers of grief and betrayal, teaching me that self-love was not selfish, but necessary. I learned to set boundaries, to say no without guilt, and to embrace the strength that comes from standing alone. Financial independence, once a goal, became a shield. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into projects that fueled my passion and affirmed my identity beyond the shadow of my family. Each step forward was a defiant act of healing. But the journey was not without setbacks. There were moments when loneliness felt unbearable, when the silence of the house whispered of what I had lost. Memories surfaced, family holidays, childhood laughter, the scent of my mother's cooking, that reminded me of a life I had mourned. I allowed myself to grieve those losses fully, knowing that healing was not linear. One afternoon, I found myself in the backyard, sitting beneath the old oak tree I had planted years ago, a symbol of growth and resilience. I traced the rough bark with my fingers and whispered a promise, to honor myself, to protect my peace, and to never again allow anyone to diminish my worth. The house around me was no longer just a building, it was a testament to my journey, a fortress built on courage and self-respect. I realized that family was more than blood or shared history, it was the people who stood by you, who lifted you up, and who loved you unconditionally. And if my biological family could not be that, then I would choose my own. Weeks turned into months, and the raw edges of my pain began to dull, replaced by a quiet resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Each morning, I woke with a renewed commitment to myself, a pledge to live authentically, without the burden of others' expectations. The silence from my family was deafening at times. Holidays passed without a call or message. Birthdays were celebrated without acknowledgement. Invitations to family gatherings were sent elsewhere, to people who were now the real family in their eyes. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. The sting of exclusion cut deep, reminding me of the price I had paid for my independence. But with each pang of loneliness came a stronger understanding, I was not defined by their rejection. I found solace in rituals I created just for me, a quiet morning coffee on the porch, journaling my thoughts under the oak tree, the steady rhythm of my art as I painted canvases that told my story. These acts became anchors, grounding me in a life I chose, not one imposed. Professionally, doors began to open. The projects I poured myself into blossomed, earning recognition and respect. My work was no longer overshadowed by the family narrative, it stood on its own, a testament to my determination and talent. Friends, too, became a vital source of strength. Their unwavering support and love filled the spaces where family had left emptiness. Together, we celebrated victories, shared sorrows, and built a community that was chosen and cherished. One evening, after a long day, I received a message from an old friend, "You inspire me every day. Watching you reclaim your life has been incredible." Those words warmed me in ways no family could. They reminded me that love and acceptance can come from unexpected places, and that family is not always who you're born to, but who stands by you. I also learned the importance of boundaries. No longer would I allow toxic voices to erode my peace. I distanced myself from those who sought to diminish my light, no matter the history or blood ties. This journey was not easy. It was littered with moments of doubt, tears, and the temptation to give in. But each time, I chose to stand firm. Because I had learned a vital truth: protecting oneself is not selfish. It is survival. I often reflected on the phrase my mother had shouted during the confrontation: "This is our family home." I understood then that to them, family was a possession, a legacy to be controlled and commanded. To me, family was freedom, the freedom to be myself without fear. And sometimes, that meant letting go of those who could not accept you. As I sit now in the quiet of my home, surrounded by the life I have built, I no longer crave their acceptance. I crave peace. I crave love that is unconditional and empowering. I crave belonging on my own terms. And I know, without doubt, that I will always protect this sanctuary, this home, this life, because it is mine. I once longed for acceptance, the warm embrace of family, the sense of belonging that every child deserves. But sometimes, acceptance is withheld, and the people we love become the ones who hurt us most. That was my reality. Through pain and struggle, I learned that family is not defined solely by blood or history. It is defined by respect, kindness, and the willingness to see one another as individuals, not possessions or expectations. I fought to protect my home, but more importantly, I fought to protect myself. And in that fight, I found something stronger than any family ties: self-respect. Today, I stand firm in the knowledge that not everyone who is born into your life deserves to remain in it. Sometimes, the bravest act is to let go. To protect your heart. To choose yourself. Because your peace, your dignity, your life, they are worth fighting for. I share my story not for sympathy, but to remind anyone who feels trapped or unseen that you are not alone. You have the strength to reclaim your life. To build your sanctuary. To stand tall, even when the people who should hold you up choose to let you fall. Family isn't always who gives you roots, it's who helps you grow. And sometimes, growth means breaking free.